All right, are you guys ready for your next topic? The next one is about Indiana's state of design excellence toward a definition. Your speaker will be Richard McCoy. He's an executive director of Columbus Landmark, and he's an experienced cultural leader who has a history of creating unique solutions to complex cultural heritage challenges, cultivating projects in public spaces, and teaching in universities. He will touch on conceptual framework for design excellence and how to move forward with it in the framework and ground it in a statewide perspective. So let's bring it together for Richard McCoy.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here at Indy Design Week and in the global headquarters for Indy Design Week. And it's a really great program. And I'm glad to be part of it. I'm glad that Indy Design Week is happening even during a pandemic. And it's a fun opportunity for me to maybe tell you a little bit about who I am and what we're thinking about with our organization and how it can, we think, have a big impact in the state. And so I'm going to set up a few things in a fairly short presentation today. And then I really want to invite you all to come back on Friday to have a conversation about a little bit of the framework that I'm going to put forth today with some other leaders from around the state and around the country to think about how design excellence can impact our quality of place. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. Thanks again for having me. I'm here with Poppy and Danny and Chris and Brant, and of course with Patrick. So thanks so much. It's fun to be on a kind of stage to give a talk. I don't know that I've done this in like a year and a half. So it's fun to be here. Thanks. And so greetings from Columbus, Indiana also. This is where I work, and it's an amazing place in Indiana, and I hope you all will visit. And so for Indy Design Week, as I said, we're talking about, towards a definition of a state of design excellence. And our organization, Landmark Columbus Foundation, really thinks a lot about the context of Columbus and its history. And so I'd love to start a talk about Columbus with actually this courthouse from 1871. It's a really amazing courthouse in a city, and it kind of defines the aspirations for a town. It's designed by Isaac Hogston, who was one of Indiana's most well-known architects at the time. He designed the now destroyed Marion County Courthouse and a number of other prominent buildings. And this was a big, important project in Columbus, and it kind of set the frame to say, as a community, we want to create a courthouse that looks far out into the future, that is forward-thinking, and defines what we want to be as a city and a municipality. And so I love courthouses because they sort of define what a community can be. But Columbus is probably most famous for this church. This is First Christian Church, and it was finished in 1941 by Eliel Saarinen. It's arguably the first modern church in America, and it's right here in Indiana. And this is another building that, like the courthouse, is a big, bold investment in the city. It occupies an entire city block in Columbus. It was designed by Saarinen, who at that time was described as Europe's most famous architect. And this was described in Time magazine as one of the most expensive projects happening in the late 1930s and 1940s in all of America. It's an amazing project that was happening in a town of 11,000. And so here's an exterior view and then an interior view of the sanctuary. And this building then, like the courthouse, defines the community's aspirations. It defines it as a religious community, as a Christian community. And it also sort of says, great buildings can affect our lives and they can add up to quality of place. The next sort of big investment to talk about in Columbus, it really pinpoints these ideas of quality of place and design excellence. In the 1950s, the major employer in the town, or one of the major employees, is Cummins, who today makes diesel engines and also electric engines and a number of other things. They had a problem in that their population was set to double, and they were going to need to add a new school about every other year. And they made a decision to incentivize the schools with great design. And so this building here is Lillian Schmidt Elementary, and it was created with funds from Cummins to subsidize the design. And so in this case, an architect from Chicago was brought in, Harry Weiss, to design this building, and it started a different way to think about schools. And it was the same kind of thinking with the courthouse or the church, is that great buildings change our lives. Now, there's a famous Winston Churchill quote that says, first we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. And this idea is that if Cummins is to grow and if the community is to grow, we need great schools to attract creative people to come to this town. This is the same thing that every city in America is doing right now. How can we get creatives to move to our communities? And so Cummins's idea in the 1950s was to start building great schools. They knew that families would love to have great places to move and to raise their family, or people would love to have a great place to raise their families. And so the architecture program eventually expands to include other public buildings, civic buildings, parks, public housing, libraries. This adds up, in a sense, to a quality of place, this intangible thing that says Columbus is an interesting place to live. Great, you can go get your degree at Harvard, and then you can move to Indiana, and you can work for a great company. We see, as I said, we see cities all over America employing this same strategy. At this time in the 1950s in Columbus, it was just a common sense approach to incentivize people to move there. And that was through the idea that design is a key driver to improving quality of place. Columbus is famous for other buildings in town. This is a kind of a night shot at another Aero Saarinen design building. Here's an interior of it. This is maybe arguably the second glass-walled bank in America. It changed the way we think about banks. Before this time, banks were sort of these fortresses where you would put your money and feel safe. This was a bank that said, no, we're going to be open and transparent, and we're going to try to show you the banking process. This is one of 7 National Historic Landmarks in Columbus. A National Historic Landmark is a designation that the National Park Service gives to a site that says you are of national significance. So it's uncommon for a small town to have 7 of them, and they're all modern and contemporary designs. Here's another look at the Miller House and Garden. It's another Aero Saarinen building. This is now operated by Newfields as a private residence that you can view. This is the family home, the former family home of one of the chief executives at Cummins. And then this is the former newspaper printing plant and newspaper offices of the local newspaper. And I show this to say that design and design excellence in Columbus wasn't just about Cummins and the family that controlled Cummins. It was something that went around the entire community. So the Brown family in Columbus owned the newspaper for many years, and they too invested in high quality design to make a kind of statement about what they're doing. And so this is a transparent building that in this area used to be where the printing press was. And so you could see your newspaper being made in downtown Columbus. It's really a fantastic building, and it's our most recent National Historic Landmark. It was designated in 2012. Today, though, it operates as the J. Irwin Miller Architecture Program. And so instead of printing newspapers, it's making tomorrow's designers. And so it's exciting. The first class of architects will graduate here in a matter of weeks from the J. Irwin Miller Architecture Program. And so this is a quick just sort of look at the context of Columbus. And there's about 100 significant modern buildings in Columbus. And if I were to break it down in general ways in a sort of a pie chart, about a third of those were created or subsidized by the Cummins Foundation Architecture Program. About a third of them were created or built by the Irwin and Miller families through their banking enterprise or through Cummins. But about a third of them were created by people that didn't have a connection to either one of those, such as the Brown family. And so by the 70s and 80s in Columbus, it was a community unlike any other. It had 4 corporations headquartered there. It had 2 Fortune 500 companies. It had business leaders that were operating on the national stage. One was the chairperson of the nation's Chamber of Commerce. Another directed the National Council of Churches and helped arrange the March on Washington. And so there's this sort of ethos that comes around Columbus that says that the built environment changes the way that we understand place. And it's one of very few examples in America where you can point to this. There have been a few other cities that have studied this and tried to figure it out. And today, as I mentioned, this is where many city and state governments are trying to incentivize us to create ways to improve the built environment, to convince the next generation to move downtown, to be invested in their main street, to love where they live. And so this is a little bit what I wanted to talk about, but I'll just quickly talk about our organization and how we are connected through these ideas of design excellence and quality of place. So Landmark Columbus Foundation has the mission to care for, celebrate, and advance the cultural heritage of Columbus. And we use those words pretty specifically to say that cultural heritage is more than just the built environment, but it's the intangible things, the traditions and values of the town. And so we do this through 3 program arms: Landmark Columbus, Exhibit Columbus, and Columbus Design Institute. And in these program arms, we are, in a sense, exploring ideas of design excellence. And so Landmark Columbus is a program arm that is a progressive preservation effort. And we try to assist building owners to care for their heritage. And we do this in sometimes pretty straightforward ways, in other ways, in maybe some non-traditional ways. And so I'm not sure if you can see these, but here's sort of 3 featured projects. One of the things we're working on is with North Christian Church, this amazing church on the north side of town. We're helping that community come up with a conservation management plan and also to activate their sanctuary. We are working with First Christian Church here in the middle. We're going to announce in a couple of weeks a major fundraising effort to restore the iconic church tower, to rebuild about the top third of it. And then on the far right, that's a now vacant theater that there's a community coming together to help restore. So part of design excellence is thinking about the past and bringing the past forward to today. And we do this in fun ways. We've had sort of bicycle rides that give people a chance to experience culture in a different way. But we're always interested in connecting with the next generation. These are 7th graders from the school just across the street from North Christian Church that came last fall with their masks to help us care for the landscape at North Christian Church. And so we're always trying to find a way to get the next generation involved. The next program arm is Exhibit Columbus, and this is where we really put Columbus's traditions and values on display by using the context of Columbus to create a 2-year cycle of programming that explores a theme with exhibition participants that eventually build installations. And so we do this through a symposium, and we love to do them in person to invite people to Columbus to experience the heritage firsthand. So we have a symposium to think through an idea that then we carry through to create built installations in downtown Columbus. And this is a way for us to have a dialogue with the past and look to a future. And so a key part of that is to make installations that are in conversation with the built environment. This is one that continues to get a lot of attention. These are all temporary, meant to be up for 3 to 4 months. This is Wikiyami, created by Studio Indigenous in 2017. They were one of our Miller Prize winners. Wikiyami is the Miamia word for wigwam. And this is a contemporary interpretation of a wigwam, which was a traditional structure of the Miami people that were here before Europeans arrived. And so he made sort of a stylized contemporary understanding of that. In 18, we had another symposium, and we like to use our downtown facilities as a way to convene conversations and allow people to explore heritage firsthand. And this is an installation from our last cycle of Exhibit Columbus at the steps of City Hall. This is by Bryony Roberts' studio, and she made a project called Soft Civic to encourage people to engage with their municipal government in a direct way and in a fun and interesting way. This is an installation that was in front of the Library Plaza. We had an awesome day where we had a fully immersive Spanish-speaking day and had a performance by Ballet Folklorico. in downtown Columbus. We're also deeply invested in bringing design excellence through universities. This is a 3D printed pavilion created by a Ball State professor, and this is another sort of project created by a professor at Indiana University that welcomed people to that building I showed you earlier, the former newspaper building, which is now home of the architecture program. And so we try to create a sort of downtown community-wide space for people to enjoy the exhibition. We're currently in the third cycle of this program called New Middles, and we're about to open our third exhibition this fall. And so these are ways for us to explore design excellence and quality of place in an immediate and transitional and temporary way. And then the last program arm that I'll talk about from our organization is called Columbus Design Institute. And this is a technical service initiative of the organization that we've used to connect with other partners to think about a design process or design excellence in their community. And these are probably much too small, but this is the program arm that, in a sense, I'm speaking to you all today, which is out of the Institute, which is to say, we want to talk about these and further this outside of Columbus. Last year for Indy Design Week, we did a really fun program called Homeworks, where we explored how we were managing the world just after the pandemic sort of caused everyone to go into lockdown. But at the same time, we've been working with mayors around the country to explore how design impacts their cities. So in 2019, we hosted 6 mayors from around America and partnered them with designers to think about how design can be used to improve their downtowns. And then in the pandemic, we did this again with 5 mayors from the state of Indiana. And we wanted to explore an idea of how can design help mayors think about a post-COVID world. And so we got to know municipal leaders in Columbus, Shelbyville, Zionsville, Warsaw, and Elkhart. And this is through the thinking of that we got to this idea that there might be an opportunity to explore what design excellence means for individual communities in a way to define and measure and incentivize it in the same way that Columbus has been doing since the 1950s. And so I love this quote from a writer from Worth magazine that says, "Columbus is the nation's finest example of how enlightened corporate titans and local citizens have discovered the place of art is at the root of not just the expression of economic vitality." This is a long way to say it's not just about having an interesting place to live, but it's about improving your economy. And this is sort of where you can get an enlightened capitalist to understand that if you have an equitable and interesting place to live, it's also great for everyone's bottom line. And so the state of Indiana knows this is a bit of a challenge. And so you probably can't read this, but this is a gubernatorial decree where Governor Holcomb made a new secretary position within his cabinet. And he recognized a particular problem that the state was about to embark on. I've highlighted a little bit of this. It's probably still too small to read, but basically what it says, in the next 10 years, the state of Indiana anticipates that it will need to add about 1 million people to its workforce. And if you think about that for a minute, this is a state of, I think it's a little over 7 million. To add 1 million new jobs is a huge challenge. Right now, the state of Indiana is adding people at a kind of a trickle, I think about 5,000 people. So we're not losing population, but it's still a big lift to say, how do we fill 1 million jobs here? They estimate that about 700,000 jobs will be lost to baby boomers that will be need to fill if baby boomers, we ever find out they want to retire. They could one day maybe retire. And then we also know that there will be new jobs, and we hope that new corporations will move here. So this is where this idea of needing 1 million people and 1 million jobs. And so the question that we started to explore, what would cause you or someone to move to a town, not just Indianapolis, but a different city in Indiana? And there are a couple key drivers to that, and the state's been busy thinking about it. And in fact, what they did is they started to break the state down into talent regions to say, well, maybe instead of thinking about this as a monolithic state, we could think about this in a regional perspective. And so the state thinks about regionality all the time. And so they made these different sectors, and then they encouraged groups in those sectors to come together to figure out how they can create a network that would, in a sense, encourage talent to move here. And they actually did it, and I feel like in a really smart and straightforward way. If you see this Venn diagram at the top, you know, how do you get someone to invest or move to a community? The community needs to have economic strength. There needs to be an idea that there's a well-paying job for you to move there. 2, you need to have a learning system. You need to have great schools. And again, we know this from Columbus, that if you want people to invest in the long term in your community, they need to have a great place to raise children. And then the third thing that the state identified is that it needs to have power of place. We talk about this in different ways. It's power of place or quality of place. It's more or less the same thing. It's the idea is that what is this place you're moving to? And we think about this in a maybe a more concrete way when your friend moves to Austin or your friend moves to California or Colorado. It's more than just a beautiful place that has mountains. It's also a great built environment. And then it's also kind of that intangible thing. Do I like the people that are here? Do I see myself there? Do I fit in there? So the power of place is, in my mind, the most sort of subjective kind of part to evaluate and therefore to improve. Economic strength, you can kind of look at that in one way or another. Is there a job for me? Am I going to be able to make what I think I should make? And the learning system, you know, there's pretty good systems that allow us to grade what a school is and how it's performing. But power of place, it's much more difficult. The hypothesis that we have is the #1 driver to improve power of place is design excellence. A better designed place will improve power of place. And so this is to say, this is what we are excited to bring to Indy Design Week this week, is to say, well, let's take some time and think about that. And so how do we define and measure power of place? And so I thought, okay, well, I'll come up with a definition that makes sense to me. What is power of place? And it's a place's unique and recognizable character that influences all aspects of residents' life. So this gets way beyond, is it a nice park, but it's also, are there good trails? Do I feel safe biking? Can I hang out with my friends? Does it have a good library? And so it can get a pretty broad range. And so how do you measure something that big? Well, it's complicated, and I think it's subjective. So if we leave that bigger thought alone for a minute, and we say, what if instead we look to measure design excellence? This is something that seems a little bit more easy to quantify and to measure. And so the question is, what is design excellence and how do we measure it? And it's interesting, there's a number of people that work in this area, but there haven't been a really sort of clear way to do this in a way that would respect regionality. Because we know that what design excellence might mean in downtown Indianapolis is different than what design excellence might mean in Columbus or Fort Wayne or Elkhart or Madison, Indiana. It has to do with the scale of the town. And so it's a bit of a subjective effort. But what we see is that organizations are interested in incentivizing it. So in Indiana, we have the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce, the Indy Chamber, that every year hosts the Monumental Awards. And this is awards, in a sense, for design excellence. This is only for Marion County and the sort of donut around Marion County to sort of quantify what design excellence might mean there. And what's interesting about that is that, first of all, it's just about one region, but 2, the jury for that changes every year. And so it's a little bit subjective in how you judge it. In the same way, the American Institute for Architects, the largest statewide organization dedicated to the architecture profession and also licensed architects to make sure they build buildings that are safe for you to go into. And the ASLA, which is the American Society of Landscape Architects, sort of the inside and the outside of a building. They also provide professional design awards that are meant to recognize design excellence. So there are folks that are thinking about this, but what we're trying to say is that can we come up with a definition or a set of a framework that would allow us to evaluate it in each region of the state? And in this way, if we are able to evaluate it, then we could find ways to incentivize it. We could find ways for better design to happen in our communities in an interesting way. And so ultimately what we want to do is to improve the power of place in Indiana. So to do that, first you need to evaluate it and then improve design excellence for people. And that's a really important thing to say, is this is for people. This is to make a city better place to live. It's really about a kind of one-to-one relationship. It's for humans. It's not for cars. It's not for bicycles. It's not for corporations. It's for people. How do you make an experience in a community that is more interesting? And so we look at sort of 4 key areas in downtowns. And I say downtowns because downtowns are what we think of in cities. And that's where you live. Even if you live in the suburb, you say you live in Indianapolis. And when you think of Indianapolis, you think of downtown. And so really, no matter where you live, your address will indicate a downtown, which in many cases will dictate where you identify. What is your place that you're from or where you live? And so we wanted to evaluate improvement. We suggest it should be done in 4 key areas. 1, on the streets, the most public of spaces, sidewalks, streets, cultural places, libraries, museums, parks, and civic places. And by civic places, I mean, our municipal government areas. And so this is, a very basic framework to do that. And our next step in this project is actually this Friday at 1:45, we're going to have a conversation with 4 experts that are thinking about this nearly every day. And so one is going to be Blair Milo, who is the secretary of the Career Connections and Talent. She's the person that the governor tapped to run that sector that we talked about when he made the gubernatorial decree. Blair used to be the mayor of LaPorte, Indiana, and so she left her position as a mayor to come work for the governor. And then the other is Julia Day from GEL. GEL is a national organization that's based in New York and Copenhagen, and they think a lot about how people interact with their environment and ways that we can make a better environment for people. And then also joining us is the recent past president of ASLA Indiana, Randy Royer, who has many years of experience building places in Indiana, and then the current president of AIA Indiana, Andrew Mitchell. And so we're actually going to have a bit of a statewide look at what this means. And I hope you'll join us on Friday at 1:45 at Indy Design Week to go over that. And so thanks very much for the opportunity to speak at Indy Design Week. I really appreciate being able to tell you a little bit about our organization and some thoughts that we have. I encourage you to, I don't know if we have time, I don't think we have time for questions today, but I am on, I'm getting told by the production team here there might be a question.
We could send them to the networking space.
Oh, cool. We can go to the networking space. I'm on various social medias, not all of them. Can you say social media is plural? I'm on social media in various ways, usually under the handle at Richard McCoy. And so if you wanted to ask me a question there, I'd be happy to hop on and answer that. And so again, thanks for the time today. I really appreciate it, Indy Design Week, and I look forward to tuning in to many of the other talks this week. Thanks very much.